I was in a car on New Year's Eve 2022, and then I was in a car in February of this year. But for 13 months, I was completely car-free, much to the surprise of many people I met over the course of the great adventure I called Car-Free 23. Before we get started, you're probably wondering why I did this. Why would someone living in the United States willingly remove the most convenient method of transportation in this country from their life entirely? To be totally honest, it started as a spur-of-the-moment decision. About a week into the year, I realized I hadn't been in a car yet. There wasn't any particular reason, I just had no use for cars. As someone who doesn't love cars and lives without a driver's license, I figured it couldn't be too difficult to try and go a year without getting in one at all. And so, with no idea of how I would accomplish it, Car-Free 23 started. I decided that I would go all year without using a car for transportation, as a driver or as a passenger, and I would only be using transit, bicycles, walking, and shared micromobility to get around. Like many aspiring and current urban planners, I knew a lot about the damage cars cause to cities, people, and the environment. I felt guilty for getting in them while also talking about the significant drawbacks to using them at all. Plus, living without a driver's license my whole life helped me prepare for the challenge. So, you may be wondering, how did I accomplish the regular tasks in my life car-free? It's not super complicated. I'm lucky enough to live in Seattle's U District, which has a fairly robust network of public transit, including a light rail station and several frequent and local bus services. So for most things, I use transit. There's frequent transit service from my apartment to the nearest grocery store. I commuted to work by taking the light rail to the bus, and I ran my other errands using transit as well. Seattle, thankfully, has many transit-accessible commercial centers, so I didn't have to go too far out of my way for shopping either. Relying on transit can be a blessing and a curse. Without paying for a car or spending time and energy stuck in traffic or parking, I had a lot more free time, especially while on the bus, to watch movies, read books, listen to music, and get work done. However, transit has faced a lot of challenges lately. Because of this, I faced a few canceled buses and several delayed buses and trains. This experience gave me incredible insight into people who are reliant on transit full-time, and how rewarding and frustrating that experience can be. It also highlighted the massive importance of improving frequency, coverage, and span of transit everywhere to ensure people can get where they need to go when they need to go. I had a few unpleasant experiences getting stuck with long waits, long walks, or cutting trips short to make the last bus of the night. The most interesting transit trips for me were the long-distance trips. My commute to work was about 3 hours each way and taught me a lot about commuting and supercommuting via transit, although that's a subject for another video. I visit Vancouver, BC to see family and friends regularly, so I ended up on a lot of Amtrak, Flixbus, and Greyhound services. While I rode these occasionally before Car-Free 23, I'd also get rides with other people for many of these trips, so I did ride a lot more. Being a frequent long-distance rail and bus rider comes with challenges, such as delayed buses and trains being the norm rather than the exception some days, but it also led to a lot of great interactions with people I hadn't had the opportunity to have before. Plus, the train rides were pretty scenic, at least when it was light out. Of course, transit doesn't take me everywhere, so I also own 2 bicycles. I had an e-bike, may it rest in peace, which was perfect for carrying things I buy at stores and getting to places that aren't super far away but aren't easy to get to on transit, including some parks and the houses of relatives and friends. I also have an older city bike, which is great for taking on transit and using as a last-mile connection to avoid walking longer distances in more suburban environments. It also works for short-distance trips where I just need to get around the neighborhood quickly. While I love biking, it can often be a very frustrating experience, even in a more bike-friendly city like Seattle. While we're making progress on building protected bike lanes, slowing down traffic on local streets, and creating a more connected network of bike infrastructure, there are still major gaps. 2 examples in my neighborhood are Northeast 45th Street and 15th Avenue Northeast, both of which are high-traffic stroads that make biking uncomfortable at best and unsafe at worst. While alternate routes do exist and are being improved, they require significant detours for many trips, slowing down bikes further than Seattle's hills already do. Trips between neighborhoods can also be difficult, and with few signed bike routes and greenways along local streets, I usually had to pick out winding routes on local streets and patchwork bike lanes and trails with Google Maps. That being said, Seattle is slowly moving in the right direction with bike infrastructure, and I look forward to seeing more bike lanes and better safety in neighborhoods like mine soon. The final mode I used was my own 2 feet. I really enjoy walking places and find it to be the best way to learn about what a neighborhood, city, or place is all about. Of course, I'm also lucky enough to live in a decently walkable neighborhood. I can walk to all of my university classes and to nearby stores and businesses when I need to. The fairly dense, mixed-use urban planning around me makes walking a lot easier and more convenient than if I lived in a more conventional suburban-style neighborhood. While this made Car-Free 23 significantly easier, walking in places where the bus dropped me off, for example, made me even more grateful for the environment I live in, and shows how we should be improving pedestrian safety and infrastructure in our cities regardless of where we live. There are still huge parts of cities like Seattle that have poor or non-existent pedestrian infrastructure, and these issues can be further worsened in more suburban areas, where cars are even more centered in planning and engineering choices. Now you might be wondering about the other trips I've taken this year, and it's true, not everything is a simple walk, bike ride, or bus ride away. For example, earlier this year I traveled to my school's retreat without a car and made a video about it if you'd like to see my experience. I also traveled to Vashon Island, just west of Seattle, for a family vacation, and while the drivers tended to be courteous and safe, biking for miles up steep hills each day was exhausting. I learned a lot in Car-Free 23. I learned about new bike routes, different neighborhoods, and more simply by having to be creative with how I move around. I've also been a lot more observant of the places I go to. Obviously, moving around car-free in the United States generally requires you to slow down, and I've taken advantage of this to fully observe and understand the places I pass through. For example, I've learned so much about the city of Olympia, where I worked, simply by walking parts of downtown and getting to and from the office each day. Slowing down has also shown me in clear detail the massive shortfalls that American cities have. I'm much more exposed to the overwhelming, fast-moving traffic. I see up close the hostility of poorly designed buildings and public spaces. And most importantly, it becomes extremely obvious how difficult it is for those who don't have the option of driving. Whether someone is disabled, young, old, low income, or simply unwilling to drive, so many pieces of our cities are designed without these people in mind, giving nowhere to move around or interact with the space. Our cities are full of car infrastructure, and when you don't use a car, this becomes blindingly obvious. From people I met on the bus to pretty scenery while biking to late-night walks around the neighborhood, I've grown a new appreciation for Seattle and the surrounding region. I feel like I'm more connected to my city, and it feels more like a home to me now than it ever has before. I know my street better than before, and I know the people around me better because I spend more time with them. So where am I at now? At the start of February, I got in a car to catch a 6 a.m. flight and ended up in a few more cars in California. Some not by choice, but that's a story for another day. I also got in a car with my parents later in the month. And while I may be using cars every now and then, I don't think that's erased any of the lessons I learned in 2023. I think that being fully car-free for so long taught me what it means to feel real freedom, and what living in this country can truly be if we're able to make it into a less car-oriented place. In my experience, there's a certain mindset that comes from driving. The idea that you can just go anywhere, anytime, for any reason. The idea that other modes of transportation aren't feasible simply because they're slow or inconvenient. The idea that even if you take the bus, the car will still be there, your safety net, for a rainy day. However, when you choose that slower, less convenient path, your perspective shifts. You start to understand the issues with the cities we've built and start to see the solutions for what we can do to make them more walkable, bikeable, transit accessible, and generally livable for the people in them instead of the cars. And that was my biggest takeaway from Car-Free 23. Cars disconnect our society, but transit, walking, and biking reconnect the fabric that cars have torn. Leaving cars behind as much as possible allows us to truly see how to connect with the people and places we zip by and ignore every day, and I don't know if any time savings can erase the value of that for me. Thanks for learning about my car-free journey today, and while being car-free is difficult and nearly impossible in some places, I hope you're able to try it at some point, even if just for a week or two. It was a truly eye-opening experience, and I'd be so happy to hear your thoughts on trying it out as well.